Good morning. Thank you for including me as part of the agenda. Again, Jordan Clayton with the Utah Snow Survey, part of the NRCS. Last time I gave a briefing for the Water Board was in March, and so I wanted to provide some updates as to where the snowpack stands and what happened since our meeting in March, and of course how that has implications for our water resources in the state of Utah. The presentation that I gave in St. George in March was fairly grim, and unfortunately, the story hasn't improved since then. So let's talk about what happened with the snowpack this year. We've been looking at these graphs all year, and so I don't need to belabor this too much. Snow water equivalent of the state of Utah is shown with the black line, and you can see the trend that's happened over the course of the winter. We peaked right in early March, right around the time of that meeting, at 8.4 inches, and since that meeting, by the time we got to April 1st, there was a very rapid dry down of Utah's snowpack. In fact, the most rapid decrease in our SWE, our snow water equivalent, that we've observed since the snow-tell era began in 1980. You can see the very rapid decrease in that black line that the red arrow points to, again, over the course of March. So by the time we got to April 1st, we were at extraordinarily low snow water equivalent for the state at 2.7 inches, and I'll contextualize that number a little bit more in just a second. It was also a very early peak, and as you can see from the map at the top, of course, that's led to very below normal distribution of colors for the current snowpack for the state of Utah, but that I'm not going to belabor that because as we get farther and farther into the melt season, those percent of normal numbers become a little bit more meaningless, but I thought at least the long-term time series was a little bit more instructive. So since that meeting in March, this is what's happened with the snowpack. In fact, this is already a little bit old because there's been another round of flights from the Airborne Snow Observatory since April 18th and April 20th. But you can see in the blue, that's where the snowpack was in early March for the Uinta and the Weber headwaters. By the time we got to later April, the snowpack, in terms of the quantity of water within that snowpack, had really deteriorated across all elevations, and you can see, particularly in the lower elevations, how much the depletion was evident, but also even up to those higher elevations, you can see there's been quite a bit of loss by that time. One of the things that's been a recurring case that we've been talking about that's created some confusion this year is the water year-to-date precipitation values. So what's shown in the bottom right is the water year-to-date precipitation for the state of Utah, showing about 90% of normal, 88%, something like that. But a lot of that, as we've been saying, was boosted by that very early water year precipitation fell in October. So what's shown on the map on the left is if we excluded October, if we just started November 1, this would be the percent of normal for Utah's basins, again, from November through just about yesterday. And of course, the yellow is below normal and the orange is getting a little bit more below normal. So we're getting a little bit of a better picture for the winter precipitation when we just scrape off the October portion of that distribution. We've been hanging our hat a little bit on the soil moisture picture, and we've been talking pretty much all winter about the fact that some of that is very unusual. It had to do with the midwinter rain that we received at high elevation, and also the October precipitation really boosted things at the beginning of the water year. And then more recently, we've been having some above normal soil moisture values for different areas of the state and really pretty much statewide because of the early snowmelt. So you can see if we look at the black line for this year's current soil moisture condition and how that compares to the green line, it's really a very similar curve. It's just shifted to the left. And so the soil moisture picture has been very normal this year for a normal snowmelt pattern, but it's just been shifted, of course, early in timing. The frightening part about all that is that it's I think, very clear to see that we're getting into those record low conditions right now. We're expecting a longer than normal period of dry mountain soils. That has potentially two implications. One is we're concerned about the fact the link that might have to fire hazard during the summer, and there's, I think, quite a lot of good work going on looking at that risk. The other thing is the early dry down may potentially lead to an impact on next year's runoff. We've seen that in the past. If we don't get a good summer monsoon, which we're really hoping for, if we don't keep those mountain soils wet going into next year's snowpack season, we can see an impact on next year's snowmelt runoff. So we're going to be watching that and, again, hope for a wet August and September monsoon in particular, which signs do suggest we might get, but time will tell on that. These are the more recent stream flow forecasts. These were issued just about a week ago, I should say. Now, these are the May 1 forecasts for April through July flow. And I've colored these by percent of normal, where red is less than 25% of average flow. And so we sort of tweaked the legend a little bit to accentuate places that are going to have particularly dry runoff volumes. And again, across the state, we're really not seeing any locations with close to normal flow. And of course, many locations around the state less than 50% and some in that really bottom percentile range. This is what it looks like if we focus on the basins instead of the individual forecast points that were shown in the last slide. There is definitely the potential to break some records. The red dots here are forecast points around the state where we have the strong potential to break records for low runoff from April through July. This is looking at those 50th exceedance probability values. And I've been talking all spring about the fact that this is an unusual runoff season. So it might be more prudent to look at the 70th exceedance probability values. And when we do that, we see there's quite a large increase in the number of sites that might have record low flow for, again, that April through July period. The orange here is the second lowest that we're expecting. So those sites in particular were listed in our water supply outlook report that was issued on May 1st. They're shown again here. Of course, there's way too much information to gather on a slide, but I just show it here for context. A really large number of sites, really pretty much from every county, more or less, in the state, that there are candidates for very low flow. Some areas of the state more pronounced than others. I'm just going to backtrack for a second. The Price San Rafael headwaters has a large number of sites that have the potential to have very low flow. Same with the Dirty Devil and a couple other areas. One of the things that's changed since the last time we met as a group, I was talking in the past about the anomalous conditions that are leading to challenges for our runoff modeling in the past. One of the things I had to add to this slide since we met last is this one that I've highlighted in yellow. We saw a significant runoff during the month of March that's not captured in our April through July runoff volumes. And so, again, the amount of water that we're anticipating for that April through July runoff period is even lower now because of the fact that some of that happened early and was somewhat inconsequential. What's shown here are these snow-to-flow plots. I've been showing these this spring because one of the points that we're really trying to drive home is both that the runoff is happening early because of the snowmelt happening early, but also the runoff response has been very, very muted. What's shown here are for different basins, the snowpack in that basin compared to the runoff from that basin. So this happens to be the Duchesne River near Tabiona. You can see in the headwaters for that particular site, the snow water equivalent shown with the black line and how it's evolved over time. You can also see the stream flow at that forecast point, the Duchesne near Tabiona, with that dashed black line and how muted that response has been to that loss of snowpack. The range of observations that stream flow has seen in the past are shown by those gray shades. So you can really see how unusually low these stream flows are. You can get these kinds of plots for any forecast point in the state by clicking on our webpage. The interactive map, where you're on the forecast map portion of that webpage, and I can help you find this if you'd like. But you can click on any of those forecast points and pull up these snow-to-flow diagrams. Just one more of these. This is the Severe at Hatch, same kind of issue. You can see the really low snowpack and how early it melted out, and there's a little bit of a response for the Severe at Hatch, but of course we're back in those below normal values for that river point. Now this was included in our April and I think May 1 reports. It was really accentuated in the April 1 report, but I didn't show this graph, and I just show it here to really drive home the point of how unusual this year's April 1 snowpack was. We know April 1 snowpack going way back in time because that's one of the things that's been measured since 1930 or so in the state of Utah. We don't always know where the snowpack peaked those years. It could have been outside of the March and April 1 measurements, but we do know what those March and April 1 measurements were going all the way back in time. And we can look at 15 continuous sites that have been reliably measured and are sort of robust measurement sites going back that entire period of record and see how anomalous 2026 has been. It really jumps off the page in terms of being just strikingly low. We know that it's by far the lowest April 1 snow water equivalent that we've seen in the state of Utah going back through that entire recorded history. One of the concerns that I raise here is, could there be longer-term impacts from this year's anomalous snowpack? I was just a guest speaker at the Water Conservation Forum that Josh led a week or two ago. Josh Zimmerman, I should use your full name, sorry. And one of the, I think, really consequential speakers in that meeting was Paul Brooks from the University of Utah. And he showed this slide with different, of course, context on it. But the reason why he was showing this is it's a relationship here on the left side between annual precipitation and annual stream flow. What is the relationship between what we're seeing in our snowpack and our precipitation, and how is that manifest, in other words, in stream flow? And when you add the groundwater signal, you get the pattern on the right. And the implications of this is that the longer term dry down of our groundwater and our soil moisture really has a strong impact on what we see in terms of our stream flow, which we knew, but this really, I think, shows us how much stronger that correlation gets once we, again, consider both the precipitation and the groundwater. And why that matters is when we have really poor snowpack seasons like this one, we could have an impact on next year's runoff season by, again, drying down those groundwater environments and the deep soil moisture. This is the statewide reservoir picture as of May 1st. We're at the graph is incorrect. Sorry, the graph is correct, but the number on the graph is incorrect. It should say 70%, which is 13% less than this time last year, but close enough. You can see this year is kind of right in the middle of where we were a couple of years ago and where we've been recently. We're right in the middle of that trend. These are the major basins for the state of Utah, shown last year with the purple and this year with the green. Really, a couple places to point out. Southwestern Utah actually has increased storage a tiny bit. There's been some losses in the severe system, of course, as we know. When we combine our reservoir storage with the forecast that we've been talking about, we get these surface water supply indices. I talk about these a lot because it gives us a picture for how much water we're actually going to have available during that summer season. Because it adds on, again, the current water that's stored in these basins with what we're forecasting to get added to that from our runoff. When we do that, we see that we've got, as is shown by the red arrow, a really large number of basins around the state that are in the red. In fact, not just in the red, but below the 10th percentile for surface water supply expectations. There's a few that I've listed that are not expected to be exceptionally low, but they're still expected to be below normal. That's the Ogden, Provo, Price, and Virgin. The Bear is expected to be close to normal, but everywhere else in the state is expected to be basically in the bottom 10th percentile for runoff. So that's really exceptionally low and quite concerning. All right, this is what's happening with the Great Salt Lake. You can see the graphs for SWE, precipitation, and soil moisture, very similar to the statewide picture on the right side. Currently at a 4th percentile for SWE. We're getting towards the end of the snowpack season, so that's not a surprising number at this point. 31st percentile for precipitation, and 5th percentile for soil moisture, again, very similar to the statewide story. This is the May 1 forecast picture for the Great Salt Lake. The inflow, if we're looking at that 70th exceedance probability number, would be about 175,000 acre feet, which is about 25% of normal. The lake has already peaked at 4192.3. Don't expect the lake to come up anymore. It looks like it may be actually starting to go down a tiny bit. Here's the range of forecasts for the lake shown in terms of percent normal and the volumes of water. Those are the same forecasts, just shown with those two different options on the screen. So the top is percent normal and the bottom is the thousands of acre feet. And you can see the lowest inflow to the lake for that April through July period being 1992 and how that compares with that forecast distribution. And then finally, the Lake Powell inflow forecast isn't going to cheer you up. The 50th exceedance probability forecast issued on May 1st was a little bit less than 1 million acre feet of water into the lake, which is very similar for the NRCS and the Colorado Basin River Forecast Center. Both of those forecasts are shown on the slide here, with CBRFC at the top and the NRCS at the bottom. You can see the evolution of those over time. Pretty scary amount of inflow into Lake Powell this year relative to normal. Sorry for the content. These are some nice pictures of us measuring the snowpack up by Spirit Lake a couple winters ago when we had good snow to measure there. Happy to take any questions.
Any questions for Jordan?
Just a question as far as what kind of influence do you think this is as far as with groundwater? Because there is no snowpack this time of year, and I realize that each area, a lot has to do with the geotechnical, the soil formation, as far as the percolation rates and those kind of things like that. But just any kind of idea as far as what kind of an impact on the groundwater that this year has made?
Yeah, it's an excellent question and one that I don't have a solid answer for. We don't have a great, while we do have some groundwater monitoring, we don't have anywhere near the amount of monitoring that we have for surface water. And so it's hard to really have a good statewide answer to that question. Certainly when we have less, as you mentioned, less percolation into the groundwater, we're both going to impact this year's runoff. Not necessarily that it's the same water. We know that it takes longer than that for the water to travel through the system. But it does push out a certain amount of water, and that's going to be depleted when we have low snowpack years like this one. And of course, as I was mentioning, the research from the University of Utah suggests that there may be longer term implications for next year's runoff when we have years like this. So there's potentially a concern about how much we deplete the groundwater system also intentionally and how that might impact next year's runoff.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? We greatly appreciate you coming.
Thank you.
And we like you, even though you bring us really bad information. We like you.
That makes one of you. Thank you very much.
Thanks.